what you might learn. I'm going to give you some processes to teach you to heal with your mind. Many of you who heal with your mind anyway, and you've been doing it for years, just humor me and kind of go along with what I say. It won't hurt you any. You can go back to your normal methods later. What I'm trying to offer you is a minimalist set, just the things that you need to focus your intent. I'm going to try to teach you, or you will probably find that you can focus your intent effectively without the usual processes and rituals. Most people, when they go to focus intent, they have to sit down in a quiet place, they have to close their eyes, then they have to breathe deeply a few times and relax and maybe go through a relaxation process, and then they start saying the mantra, they start their meditation, and all of this takes time, and maybe in the beginning it takes a half hour or so, and then later it takes 5 minutes or so, but it's a ritual that you go through to meditate, and it's very common, and meditation is taught that way. You're going to find today that it's unnecessary. You don't have to do that. You can reach an altered state that's very effective for your working in consciousness just like that, and it works. You believe that the ritual that you go through is necessary, but mostly that's habit. So just bear with me and we'll go through it very quickly. Partly, I'm going to go through these quickly because I don't want to give you time to think about what you're doing. If I give you time to think about it, you'll start analyzing, judging, comparing, and that will ruin it for you entirely. So I go through very fast so that you don't have time to do that. You just barely have enough time to follow what I'm doing and do it before we move on to something else, and you'll be a lot more successful that way than if I actually gave you time to think about it. So if you do fall behind today, don't worry about it. Just, if you get stuck in something that takes a little longer, then no stress. Just kind of join back in and keep going. That's fine. I will be moving quickly on purpose. We're going to learn how to parallel process and multitask. So we're going to have our attention operable in more than one reality at a time. That's something you should learn to do. It's much more efficient that way than it is only being in one place at a time. You ought to be able to parallel process. A little short idea how to do that. The best way to learn to parallel process is to start your meditation in a different way than you normally do it. If you normally sit down to meditate, lie down or stand up. Do it differently. It will seem impossible at first. I just can't meditate lying down, because you always meditate sitting up, or if you always meditate lying down, you just can't meditate sitting up. These are just habits. You get into these habits, the habits become rituals. You don't need them. Learn to meditate standing on one foot in the corner. Learn to meditate while you walk in the park. Learn to meditate while you're riding on a city bus full of school children. Learn to meditate under any kind of circumstance and keep at it until you get good at it, till you really can be as good on the school bus with children as you can alone in your home in your favorite chair. You just practice. It's impossible at first, but you'll see. It'll come, and you'll be able to do that. What that does, it gives you a certain amount of stability and robustness in your meditation, which will then allow you to parallel process very easily. Because when you're in a bus full of children, it's not that you don't hear them yelling and screaming. It's that you don't care. You're not processing it. You let your ego and your intellect detach from it. It's still there in the background, but it doesn't make any difference. It's just there in the background. You can let it be without being annoyed by it, without being bothered by it, you see? So that's what you have to learn, to let your environment go. And that will help you then learn to parallel process. Eventually, you should be able to start healing somebody while they're standing in front of you and you're having a conversation with them about their ailment. By the time they're done telling you what the ailment is, you should be almost done with the healing process because you can do it as you go. You don't have to go later and sit down and light the incense and ring a bell and cross your legs and do all the things that are part of your normal ritual. We're going to switch states quickly and effortlessly. We're going to use a intent to define a unique address through a relationship. Now, when we do remote viewing, you can do remote viewing in the future. You can do remote viewing in the past. You can do the remote viewing in other places rather than physical. We have this idea that remote viewing is to go to some place and look what's in that place. And we will do that. That's kind of the way most people look at it. But what remote viewing is gathering data out of the database. That's all it is. So I can give you a set of coordinates and say, go to these coordinates and tell me what you see. Or I can say, I've got something in a box under my bed. Tell me what it is. Or I can say, I can say, I have a box and I've got something in it. You know what's in it? So there's all these different kinds of things. I don't actually have to have the box here or the object here for you to remote view it. Or I've had a lot of people who looked at these exercises on YouTube months, 6, 7, 8 months, even a year after they were done, and they got them all right. Well, those objects weren't in boxes anymore. The intent has to give a unique address. If you say, I would like to see a picture of what was in that box when that experiment was done, you'll get the picture. It's just data out of a database. Doesn't matter that that box has been burnt and the thing's been thrown away. It doesn't make any difference at all, you see. You can still get them all right. You're not really, see, you tend to think objectively again. You're looking at an object, and if the object isn't there, you won't be able to see it. You're not doing that. You're collecting data out of a database. Okay, so you don't need to have it here. It doesn't need to be physical. The boxes I had with all the neat targets in it, they're all in my car. Yeah, well, no problem. They're just as easy to view there as they are anywhere else. We'll leave them in the car. I still can show them to you. Well, that's the way it is. All right, it'll work as well. Makes no difference where they are, what they're doing. When I did this last time, I had some of them where I left at my house, some of them I had with me, you know, that sort of thing. And there wasn't any difference. You know, the success rate is as good with one as the other. You're just getting data from the database. So you need a unique address. So when I say we're going to go diagnose and heal Susie Q, well, there's probably 1 million Susie Qs. And if you just think with your intent, I want to go heal Susie Q, you will probably get a random selection of all the Susie Qs in the universe. You don't want to do that. You want to intend to go heal the Susie Q that I'm talking about that's part of this exercise. There's a difference, you see. Intents have to be very specific, very precise. You can't have sloppy intents. It's just like if you go to Google and say, love, well, you get 6 million things back, right? Some nice, some not so nice, but you get lots of stuff, not necessarily what you were looking for. It's the same way. You're querying a database. You have to go in with a very specific intent. If you go in and say, well, I want to look and see where the, let's say where the black spots are, if we're going to let things that are not healthy be black spots. Well, there may be no black spots. You've already made an assumption. That's already, you've come to a belief. It may be that they have the flu, and there are only black spots, but the whole body's just kind of gray. And you'll miss it because you will intend to see black spots, and what you'll get back is garbage because, you know, it's not in the database. There weren't any black spots. You need to intend to see what's not healthy, you see, rather than be specific like that, where you don't want to be specific. So see what I'm saying? You just be real careful how you word your intent. This is a query to a database. If you don't think it precisely, so it's exactly clear what it is you intend to get, then you'll get junk. Because you'll go in with a query that has 300 different answers and you'll grab one of them. Or you'll get all 300 of them all in a big jumble. It won't work for you. All right, so that's why I can say, you know, Mr. X. We're going to go look at Mr. X. You don't need to know who Mr. X is. I need to know who Mr. X is. And there has to be a Mr. X that's part of this you know, experimental exercises we're doing. That's all. You just need to know that that's the one I'm talking about. It's the one you're focused on. So that's how you can use your intent. Some healers need to touch hands. Some need to see pictures. Some want a lock of hair. You know, they all want this connection with the physical body, but it's not about the physical body. It's about your consciousness. being able to, one, diagnose, get data out of the database, and two, modify probable future by using your intent to do so. The physical body has really nothing to do with it. It's like seeing auras. You don't need to look at a person, a physical body, to see the aura. You don't need to look at a picture to see somebody's aura. All you need to do is have an address, a unique address, who it is you're looking at. And there it is. It's just data out of a database. You see, these aren't physical bodies anyway. It's just data. The auras, whether it's the spiritual or the health aura or the emotional aura, it's just data. And you can have that data output to you in any format you want. Mainly, we get visual formats. I want to see somebody's health aura, and I want it in this visual format. Well, you have to specify the output format. This is a nice database. You get to specify the output format. So you can get that data in a graph, you get it in a picture, you can get it in any kind of form you want. If you want anger in that emotional body to be red zigzags, that's what you'll get. If you want them to be little, green daisies, that's what you'll get. If you intend it that way. It's not that that red zigzaggy line is anger in a emotional, the emotional body, that's what do they call that, the astral body. It's the only reason that most people will see that red zigzaggy line as anger is because that's kind of in our culture now. Ledbetter with his book, Man Visible, Invisible, he put all the pictures out there. People pass things around. We all kind of get the idea what it is we're supposed to see. So that's our intent to see it that way, and we do. But you can make it, and we're going to switch. One of these things, we're going to switch the color schemes around so you realize that you can, because sometimes some ways of using the colors are valuable to you than others. Now, diagnosing and healing are two different things. When you diagnose, all you're doing is collecting data out of the database. Okay? You're not sending out a signal, you're just receiving a signal. So I'll tell you to look at a humanoid shape. Now, a humanoid shape is just that. It's just a humanoid shape. It's like a gingerbread cookie. It's got kind of a round lump on top, a couple of things hanging out on the sides, down in the feet. It's just a humanoid shape. A lot of people will try to make a 3D high-res photograph of something. That's a waste of your time. All the symbol is just a metaphor. It's a metaphor to help focus your mind on what you want. So when we look at this humanoid shape, any kind of humanoid shape would work. And if you don't visualize well, just feel the humanoid shape. You don't have to actually see it. Just sense it is good enough. Fact is that men tend to visualize better than women. So a lot of women get a feeling, a sense of it, rather than a picture of it. And then when they get that sense of it, they'll tell you what they see. You'll figure that one out, right? So I don't see pictures, but here's what I saw. And they'll do that a lot. But that's because their seeing is different. They're seeing in a sense that they don't describe as visual, and that's okay. So any way that you do this is okay. It's not like there's a right way and a wrong way. The only way, well, there is a wrong way, and I'll tell you what those wrong ways are, but it's all about attitude, not about what you're doing. Important, the point is not the result, getting the right answer, but the process. Okay, no one is going to check answers. Nobody's going to say, okay, how many got that one right? And then you feel real embarrassed that you didn't get it right. And everybody else did, and then you feel we're not going to do any of that. So the only person to know whether you got it right or wrong is yourself. So we want to get rid of the anxiety, what's called performance anxiety. That'll ruin these results faster than anything. It's about a learning experience. It's about seeing a process and seeing how the process works in its minimalist form. Forget all your usual techniques. Forget your lengthy preparation. Forget relaxation. Forget meditation. Just let your intent direct what you're doing. It's all about intent. Don't try to do it. Let it happen. Let information come to you. Execute to the best of your ability. Participate. Observe what happens. Have open-minded skepticism. Be skeptical. but don't judge. You're an independent, detached observer. You have to have this attitude. You don't really care what vision comes up, what you see. You're going to ask for data, you're going to get something, and that's it. Don't try to judge and say, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense. Let me try again. Oh, that didn't make any sense. Let me try again. That won't work. Usually the first 3 seconds or so, what you got is your best data you're going to get. After that, your intellect tends to ruin it with second guessing and judging. Get into it, be immersed 100% focused, ignore your background, no expectations, no intellectual control, no analysis. What you get doesn't have to make sense. That's not the point. Just what comes to you and what you get is what you put down on the paper. Don't try to make sense out of it. Okay. Often the sense of it won't be obvious to you until afterwards, till you see the object. Then you go, oh, that's what that meant. But if you try to second guess it you won't get that. No analysis, no intellectual control, no expectations. Don't try to control it, just observe. I'm an independent observer, I'm going to do this experiment and see what happens. That's the right attitude. I'm not going to try to get the right answer. It's the wrong attitude. You're not going to try to get the right answer. I'm just going to do it and see what happens. It's a big difference than trying to get the right answer. Trying to get the right answer will prevent you from getting the right answer. I'm going to give you a lot of multiple approaches to things. And that's because not that that's something you should do all the time. I'm just trying to give you some ideas of tools you can use. And the things we're going to use are tools. When I say see an outline, a humanoid outline, that's just a tool for you to focus your intent of what you're doing. If you try to focus your intent intellectually, you often will create a problem for yourself. Eventually, when you get good at it, you can do that. But in the beginning, that's usually not a good thing to do. So we use pictures, we use other things to help, we use tools to help you focus your intent. Don't impose your own metaphors. We do that automatically on everything. The way we deal with life and deal with the data is we pattern match. We get data and we come up with the closest pattern we have in our own experience base to interpret that data by pattern match. So if I show you something that has something sticking out this side and out that side, you may pattern match that to a clock. And it might have been a corkscrew or something with the handles, you see. You pattern match. So try not to do that. Just look and see what you get. If you draw something in the middle and things sticking out of it, then let it be that way. You can decide later whether it's a clock or not. Don't try to guess at what you get. It's like, oh, I got something. Now, what was that? You see, you don't want to guess. Now, what was that? Pattern match it and do something that'll often lead you astray. Just, I got something, put it down. Don't worry about what it is. That's better. All right. Moving right along, we're going to have 6 exercises. 2 experiments in diagnosing and healing. I'm going to give you one sort of on your own to use the thing, and that is on the answer sheet. It says it's not, but I put it on the answer sheet. Oh, here's a comment I have to make. For those watching the video later, intend that you are looking at these people and remote viewing objects as they were given December 3rd, 2011. Your efforts to diagnose and heal will be applied generally to promote their better health. Whether your remote viewing objects still exist or not makes no difference. You will see them as they were on December 3rd, 2011, if that's what you intend. Okay, so relax, listen to your environment, take in all the noises and people shuffling and whatever might be going on, and then forget about it. It's not important. Don't let anything bother you. Then just follow my voice. Be a dispassionate observer. And you can close your eyes or open your eyes. It doesn't matter. However way you just feel relaxed and comfortable and not bothered with input data other than my voice. So take just a few seconds. Relax. Okay, see or imagine a 3D humanoid outline like a thick gingerbread cookie. Intend clearly that this humanoid outline represents the physical health energy body of Thomas L. as it exists at this moment. Then hold that intent. Intend clearly that the energy that represents health and well-being in this energy body be white, and what represents a physical problem be dark. The more serious the problem, the darker the energy looks. Also hold that intent. Intend that the humanoid's shape's back is facing you. That means its right side is now the same as your right side. Hold that intent. Notice where the dark areas are and which are most dark. With your attention on the dark spots, rotate the image of your viewing angle so you are looking at the side view. Then rotate further to the front view. Without losing your altered state, open your eyes and roughly draw what you have seen. Then immediately return to the viewing of the health energy body of Thomas L. This is experiment 1. Repeat the last few steps and check to see if you get the same thing. Make sure you have drawn it more or less correctly. Then return to viewing the health energy body. Okay, you should be looking at the health energy body of Thomas L. Diagnosis is complete, but continue to look at this energy body. We're now going to heal. Use your intent to direct a beam of high-powered, intensely bright white light to each dark area. Notice how this intensely powerful light beam easily restores the dark problem areas back to a healthy, very bright white color. Continue until there are no dark areas left. Now use the beam to make the entire energy body glow with intense white light. Make the white so bright that it hurts your eyes. Then put on sunglasses and crank the brightness up even further. Intend clearly that this energy body stay a super bright, healthy white for a long time. Intend that the energy you have placed on this body is so great that it will take the energy body a very long time to absorb all of it. Hold that intent. Now let that image go and simply float in the void for a moment. Experiment 2. See or imagine a 3D humanoid outline, like a thick gingerbread cookie. Intend clearly that this humanoid outline represents the physical health energy body of Don W. as it is at this moment. Then hold that intent. Okay, the humanoid outline represents the physical energy body of Don W. as it is at this moment. Intend clearly that the energy that represents health in this energy body be white, and what represents a health problem be dark. The more serious the problem, the darker the energy looks. And hold that intent. Intend that the humanoid shape's back is facing you. Its right side's now the same as your right side, and hold that intent. Notice where the dark areas are and which are most dark. Now, we're going to switch color scheme. Clearly intend that from this moment forward, healthy tissue will be a beautiful, shiny black, and unhealthy tissue will be a dirty white. The more serious the problem, the brighter the white energy looks. The worst problems glow with intense luminosity, with beams of light protruding from the affected areas. Tiny afflicted areas, even single cells, will be visible in this view. Now switch your intent back to the original color scheme. White is healthy and black is unhealthy, and hold that intent. With your attention on the dark spots, rotate the image of your viewing angle so you are looking at the side view. Then the front view. Back to the side view. To the back view, and then return to the front view. Without losing your altered state, open your eyes and roughly draw what you have seen. Then immediately return to viewing the health energy body of Don W. While viewing the energy body of Don W, zoom in for a closer look. Get closer and closer until you can see individual cells, then the insides of individual cells. Look for the problem at the cellular level. Intend to see the problems inside the cells in red. Repair and heal an individual cell. Use your white energy beam to turn that cell to a brilliant white color. Intend clearly that every afflicted cell be changed in the same way as the one you just healed. Watch them all instantly turn bright white as they follow your intent and take on the healthy characteristics of the one cell you just healed. Now zoom back out to the original view. Again, look at the total health energy body of Don W. Now use your intent to direct a beam of high-powered, intensely bright white light to make the entire energy body glow with intense white light. Intend that this energy body stay super bright, healthy, white for a long, long time. Intend that the energy that you have placed on this body is so great that it will take the energy body a long, long time to absorb all of it. Then let that image go and simply float in the void for a moment. Next, use what you have learned to diagnose and heal Amanda B. When you are done, simply float in the void for a moment. Do this on your own. Okay, experiment 3. I have a box in my car with a big 3 on it. What is in it? Do not forget what you first saw. Intend to have an image of what is in the box put on a screen or monitor in front of you. Remember what you see. Now put that result aside. Next, move your vision to the box itself, and with no expectations of what you might see, look through the box to view what is in it. Now put that result aside. Next, get a sense and feel for the utility of what is in the box. What does it do? What are its uses and functions? See what is in the box in its natural environment being used. Next, imagine me showing you on a slide what is in the box after these exercises are over. What does the slide show you? Without losing your altered state, open your eyes and write down or draw what you saw each time. Then immediately return to float in the void. Experiment 4. Intend to go to a spot on the surface of the earth that has these coordinates: 43 degrees, 52 minutes, and 44.21 seconds north, 103 degrees, 27 minutes, and 35.37 seconds west. Look around. What do you see there? Open your eyes and write down what you saw. Then immediately return to float in the void. Experiment 5. There is a red and white striped box with the number 5 on it. What is in it? Remember what you first saw. Now intend clearly to have an image of what is in the box put on the screen or a monitor in front of you. Remember what you see. Now put that result aside. Next, move your vision to the box, and with no expectations of what you might see, look through the box to view the object. Now put that result aside. Next, get a sense or feel for the utility of the object. What does it do? What is its use and function? See it in its natural environment being used. Finally, imagine me showing you a slide of what's in the box after the exercises are over. What's on the slide? Without losing your altered state, open your eyes and write down or draw what you saw each time, then immediately return to float in the void. Experiment 6. There is a white package with the number 6 on it, in which I have placed something. What is it? Remember what you first saw. Intend clearly to have an image of what is in the box put on a screen or monitor in front of you. Remember what you see there. Now put that result aside. Move your vision to the package with no expectations of what you might see. Look through the box to view the object. Now put that result aside. Get a sense and feel for the utility of the object. What does it do? What is its use and function? See it in its natural environment being used. Finally, imagine me showing you what is in the box on a slide after these exercises are over. What's on the slide? Without losing your altered state, open your eyes and write down or draw what you saw each time, then immediately return to float in the void. Now, I will give you a few minutes to remote view or heal a subject of your choice using these methods. Okay, open your eyes and let the experience go. Slowly and gradually re-embrace the physical world. Okay, let's see what the truth is on these. First, we talked about Thomas L. Thomas L. is age 6. He has cerebral palsy. Brain doesn't function sufficiently to support coarse or fine motor control. May have noticed brain or whole body depending on the detailed nuance of your intent. Okay, if you intended to find the source of his problem, you should have mainly got things in the head because the brain's the source of the problem. If you just wanted to look at what was wrong, you may have got the whole body because there's things all over the body that don't work right. That's why I mentioned in this one that we were going to look at a physical problem. Okay, so should have been mainly around the head. Also, he had a problem, particular problem with his eye. His eye, he cannot see. He's got like 2% vision out of one eye some of the time. And it's not because there's anything wrong with the eyeball or the retina or anything else. It's because the brain doesn't process the information. So you may have had a particular problem, or you may have seen something in the face. Second was Don W. Don W. has asbestosis. That means he breathed in asbestos in his life, and also he's had heart failure. So asbestosis should have been a lot of irritation in the lungs. His difficult breathing because the lungs are damaged in there. I guess they're scar tissue. They're damaged in their ability to process oxygen and carbon dioxide. The person you did on your own, Amanda B., had 3 herniated discs in her spine. They're not real serious yet. She's still at the point where she can live with them. So they probably wouldn't have been black, but they probably would have been gray at least, and you would have seen 3 gray spots down the spine. Okay. Number 3. What was in the box? You might have seen the letter Q. You might have just seen a round shape or several round shapes inside of each other. You may have turned that into a head or a face, an automobile tire, hard to say. Whatever your pattern match may have done to it. But the shape should have basically been circular. All right, experiment number 4, those coordinates. Now, you know, professional remote viewers often use coordinates. Why do they use coordinates? The reason they use coordinates is because it's very unlikely that anybody will be able to hear coordinates and know what to look at. So it leaves them with absolutely no information. Then they decided that they started to get good at geography, where they could kind of isolate where the coordinates were. And they started guessing again, which means their accuracy went down. So then what they started doing is making them blind. Then they made them double blind, which means somebody writes out coordinates of places where they know what's there. They seal them in an envelope, and they do that, and they make 200 or 300 of them. So you have 200 or 300 envelopes, all with coordinates, and they put them somewhere in a safe. Later, sometime later, another person, not the same, goes in and plucks one envelope out. Then they walk into where the remote viewer is, and they say, I have coordinates in this envelope. Go there and tell me what you see. That's the way the protocols are now. Why do they do that? Because the remote viewer has no way to apply his intellect and judging, facility to it. So you see, you don't even need the coordinates. All that remote viewer is doing is getting data from the database about the coordinates that are in that envelope, which the person who made them doesn't know which one was picked, and the person who picked them has no idea what was in them. And the remote viewer has no clue about any of it. And that way, the remote viewers get more and more accurate because you've given them less ways to interfere with the process. So that's the way that's done. All right, we got another one here. Number 5. Could have been an X. Could have been a race car. Could have been all sorts of things, I guess, but mostly it should have been scissors or something like that. Okay. And we've got one more. That arrangement Could have been a lot of things. Could have been flowers, could have been a crown, probably anything but measuring spoons. Okay, so that was the truth data that we've got. All right, so that's kind of the formal part that I have, but I want to tell you a few things about these. If you had trouble with these exercises, probably the problem was one of getting rid of the noise, not being able to keep the thoughts out. That was probably the most likely problem that you have. That gets solved with meditation. The second most likely problem that you have would have been not being able to tell your intellect to sit down and be quiet. That you instantly have I want to find the right answer. I want to do this. What's in the box? I want to know. That's primarily ego asking. You want to be right. You want to get the right answer instead of just saying, something in the box, let's see what I get. Oh, I didn't get anything, that's okay. And then when I asked you to look at it a different way, you could try it again. And if you didn't get anything, that's okay. And if you did, that's okay. Whatever you got, you'd write down. That would have been a better attitude than, oh, I really want to do this and get what's in the box. That would be a problem. Since you're just getting data out of the database with remote viewing, you, again, have to be real precise. With the remote viewing, it was easy. I just said there's something in a box. And because that's true, that there is something in a box, like I described, like the red stripes on it or something, that shouldn't have been any problem of you finding the target. Sometimes when you look at data, you interpret it badly. Sometimes you get data and then say, oh, that didn't make any sense. Let's try it again. All that was a line on the paper, when you should just put the line on the paper and let it go at that. So these things take some practice. If you practice at healing is the easier of the two to do because it's a little less opportunity for your guessing and it's a little more immediate in your feedback. Remote viewing, you have to go have somebody else find an object and do all that sort of stuff. It's a little more clumsy. The healing's easy. You know all kinds of people, relatives and friends and people you work with who know somebody that's ill. It's very simple to say, do you know somebody that has an illness of some sort? Almost always it's sure. And then, all right, let's call him Mr. X or call him, somebody you don't know. So if it's somebody I don't know, that's better. And if it's somebody you don't know, then say, okay, let's call him X or let's call him, Susie Q, like we did here, a first name and initial. And do your diagnosis and then go back and see if your diagnosis was right. It doesn't take a lot of time and it's easy to do and you'll be surprised how often you get it right. And what happens is that when you get it right, you'll notice it's a little different feeling. It's a little different process. You did it a little differently that time than when you get it wrong. So then you will try to do it that way more. So it's a learning process. So you need to do this often. If you were to do this, 4 or 5 times a week in 2 or 3 months, you'd probably be getting good at it. You'd probably be hitting, like 75, 80% with your diagnosis. That's enough statistics to know that you're actually getting data. If your mind is still busy, you may not be doing that well. So again, there's a lot of factors going on here. So calm the mind. If your mind being busy is a problem, then first do some meditation until you can hold a quiet state in your mind. And then you may at first want to take the time to get in that quiet state before you do the diagnosing. Eventually, if you practice enough, the quiet state will be instantly and you can do it on the fly anytime, anywhere. But that takes a lot of practice. So don't expect that right away, but you can. Once you start visualizing the way your mind works, when you look at that gingerbread cookie, just doing the visualizing is like a form of meditation. You can visualize things and it'll put you into a meditation state. So when you look at that gingerbread cookie and you start to see it and you see your concentration and focus is entirely on that. And when it's entirely on that, it's not on anything else. So that's why I do that. Say, look at the gingerbread man, because that will immediately put you into an altered state just by focusing on that. Some people, when they meditate, will meditate with a visual. They will imagine a soccer ball, and the soccer ball will be black and white. And then they may let the soccer ball rotate, whatever they need to fill up their mind, you see. And then they may, if they start to get noise in their head, they'll let it rotate faster, or they'll let it bounce around. And then maybe they'll change the black to purple and the white to green or something like that. And eventually they'll get slower and slower till it's still, and then they won't change it, and it'll just be there. And they'll be in a real good meditation state, just focusing on that visual. Again, it's like the mantra, it's like looking, focusing on the breath. It's just another way to put you in an altered state. So just looking for that gingerbread cookie, whether you know it or not, put you in an altered state almost instantly. A good altered state, when I say good, I mean productive, not good as in deep. We've got this idea that you have to get deep before it's any good. That's not true. Deep is just a habit. It's one of our road signs for success. You have to feel really groggy and out of it and deep, like everything's gone away and you're in the dense fog. That's not what you need at all. Matter of fact, that's really counterproductive. You don't want to be deep, because then the information you get is also in the deep fog and you have a hard time processing it. You want to be just as awake as you are now. You just want to shift to a different data stream. You just want your intent to be clear to get that data and be just as clear as you are now. Foggy, deep is unnecessary. That's a habit. It's not a requirement. It's so much easier if you're wide awake and clear and you focus your intent and you get information than if you're almost asleep and get information. Okay, so you don't have to, and it's part of why I did it this way. So we didn't actually do meditation first. We just did the visualization. Anything that focuses your mind so that you stop the chatter puts you in an altered state. Like that meditation chart, you automatically go into an altered state. Meditation is natural to you. All you have to do is stop the other stuff. And visualizing is one way to stop the other stuff, but maybe only momentarily. As soon as you did that gingerbread man, and if you said, I wonder if that's a good enough gingerbread man, I wonder if I need to make him a little brighter, maybe his arms aren't long enough, did I get his, oh, he didn't have feet, he just had legs. If you start doing all this processing, then it's gone. So you're not going to be effective anymore, because you're no longer just there with your mind still with an image. You're judging, you're processing, you're analyzing, you're worrying, you're fussing with it. That makes it not work. Okay. So one of the things you'll build as you do this is you'll build confidence. So also with the healing, heal those people that you diagnose, and you can heal. Remember, or we did white with black bad spots, and we did black with white bad spots. It's good to do black with white bad spots, and we did that with the asbestosis. The reason for that is you would have been able to see all the little damaged cells individually that way. Sometimes you're looking at a patient who has had cancer and they've had an operation. Okay, they've had a lump removed from someplace. Now, when that happens, the surgeon hopes, or at least tries, to remove all of the cancer. Oftentimes, there are a few straggling cells left, which is why they then do chemo and radiation after the surgery, because in case there are a few extra cells left, they don't want those to get restarted again. So that's why they do that. When you're looking for a few cells, and you're looking for white is good, black isn't, trying to find a tiny black cell on a white gingerbread guy is hard, you see, because you'll get the data that you ask for. Here's my gingerbread guy, show me the stuff that's black, it's dark. Well, you got it, it's all in proportion, there it is, you can't see it because that doesn't work well that way. It's good for looking at a liver, but it's not so good for looking at a cell. So then you do the reverse. Instead of black on white, you do white on black. Now you've got a cell that's a problem, it's a cancer cell, but it's really bad because it's a cancer cell, and it'll have a beam of white light kind of shooting right out of that black area. You can pinpoint it, a single cell, because white on black is much higher contrast. A little white spot or white beam coming out is a much easier thing to see. So these are just tools. There's nothing magic about this gingerbread guy. It's just your imagination. In diagnosing, all you're doing is imagining. It's a tool to help you focus on what data do I want and what form do I want it in. I want this health data, and I want it in a form of black and white in a humanoid shape. That's all you're doing. If you can get that done, you'll do fine. Your diagnosis will work. Now, when you heal, it's not just your imagination anymore. When you heal, you actually now have to have an intent that modifies probability that changes something. But the gingerbread shape can still just be your imagination. A lot of people get hung up on, I wonder if I got the real gingerbread man. Is that really a representation of that energy body? Or maybe it's just, I'm imagining a cookie. Well, it doesn't matter, you see. All you're doing is focusing your intent so that you get the right thing back. It's not that there is a right gingerbread man and a wrong one. Your imagination there is fine. I often do some imagination exercises in the beginning. And when I do those, I have people imagine all sorts of things. And gingerbread cookie's always one of them. And they all report, no problem, riding a bicycle, standing on an elephant, this, that, and that. They can do all these things perfectly clear, 3D, color, sound, smell, everything. And then I say, imagine a humanoid shape, blank. Can't do anything. Can't get it, won't come up. That's a problem with kind of a fear of failure, if you will, performance issue. If you can imagine it, you can do this. And if you practice at this regularly, let's say over 6 months, let's give it 6 months. If you do this a couple of times a week, it wouldn't be that hard even to do it a couple of times a day. You will find that you will get good at it, and that by the time we have 6 months up, you will feel confident that you're not only able to diagnose correctly, but you're able to heal. And by that I mean you're probably 75% or better on your success rate. Okay, so if you need evidence, if you want evidence that this is real, and it's not just all imaginary, then spend the time to do this, and you'll get your evidence. But I'd say do the healing first. Remote viewing's a little harder to organize, a little harder to do, and objects are a little, they're different. I've been told that people like fish, like shiny objects. They'll get those more than they'll get something else. And it involves another person. Obviously, you can't pick the object. You have to get somebody else to work with you on that. With the healing, you can pretty well do on your own because we know lots of people who know sick people. So the end here is that don't believe what I say. Go do these things. Find out. You can heal people with your mind. You can change the probabilities of events with your intent. That's the nature of consciousness. That's your ability, your birthright, if you will, as consciousness, that you can do these things. But don't let that become the focus of your life or the focus of your growth, because that's not the same as losing your fear, losing your ego, growing up, becoming love. That is the main focus. These other things are there primarily to give you evidence, to give you confidence that these experiences you're having are real. So that's what they're there. They're a tool for you to help develop confidence in the realness of what you're doing. And if you work at it for 6 months and it doesn't work very well, change the method a little bit. This method I gave you was just tools. It's not random. A lot of people use light, but light is not fundamental. There is no light. Light's virtual too. It's just a metaphor. Energy is just a metaphor. When you send somebody good energy, your word energy is a metaphor for you're going to do something that affects them. That's what it's a metaphor for. So the reason we use light beams to heal is because we believe that we need to do something in order to have an effect. If I don't send a light beam to you to heal you, then how could I possibly have an effect on you if I didn't do something to you? It's just a belief that we have. There's no need to use a light beam. We just do it because that's our habit of thinking, and it helps us focus our mind, you see. So these are just tools, just like the aura. It's just data. Yes, you can see them. I've seen them for years. You know, you can see all sorts of auras. You can collect the data of your choice. You don't just have to see, you know, your standard thing. You can look and say, I would like to see the, you can have an aura that represents the spiritual health or the spiritual progress of yourself or somebody else. And then you have to say how you'd like the output format. If you like, you can graph it. Say, I want spiritual quality on this axis, I want time on this axis, and I want to see how they've grown over time. You can get it in a graph, or you can get it in colors. You need to tell the database how your output goes. Most of us will default to the cultural norm. In spiritual growth, it's often some sort of light, white, big, stars, headdress, all that kind of stuff. You know, you read the same books I do. You know, you get all that same kind of thing. So we tend to see those things as our output format. But it's not necessary. If you want to do a prognosis, graphs are good for prognosis. Health is on the vertical axis. Time is going that way. Watch the curve go. Say, I want the curve to go for the next week, the next 6 months, the next 5 years. You know, plot it in any one you want and watch the curve go. Again, just have to be open. You're just you're just an observer. Could work, not work. Might get a graph, might not. Doesn't matter. I'm going to look, see what happens. And once you let go like that, you'll always get the data that you want. You know, the data will come back, and most of the time it will be good and it'll be correct data. If you want to do it real badly, and it's important to you that you get it right, you probably won't get it right very often. You see this thing about attitude? Attitude is more important than anything else. It's what you bring to it. So why is a skeptic that says, this is a bunch of BS, this will never work, why does it never work for them? You know, they have the wrong attitude. So this is your chance to gather evidence, if you don't already. Many of you already have done these things and have all the evidence you need. But there are some of you that would like to actually have some evidence that this exists. And it's not just a bunch of wackos who think that it exists because they're lost in their beliefs or something. Well, you need to work on it and get that evidence. It's important to get evidence. Otherwise, you don't know. Remember, open-minded skepticism. That's the only way to go. Stay skeptical. Don't let anybody talk you into anything that you don't experience. Find out for yourself. Well, now we've come to questions.
Hi. I am involved in the Occupy movement in Gainesville, Florida. And my question is, you described ideas from the fringe moving towards the center. And it seems like there are millions of us worldwide that are moving from the fringe to the center very quickly. It seems that there's been a movement of, no, we don't want this corruption, we don't want these wars, we don't want this big pharma, we don't want this corporatocracy, we don't want the corporate logos running the country instead of the people. So I wanted to ask your views on the Occupy movement. It's quite an experience being part of it. There's a sense of community, a sense of heartfelt connection and communication among the people in it. While I was here in Atlanta, I went down to Woodruff Park and visited the people doing Occupy Atlanta. It's like coming back home with these people. There's a real sense of community building, and I would like to ask your outlook and what your thoughts are on the Occupy movement.
Okay, I think it's terrific. This is a democracy, and that's what democracies do. When you have a complaint, you ought to stand up and get all your fellows to stand up with you and go make your voices known. And as long as it's nonviolent, then it has a chance of succeeding. And this one particularly has obviously grown. It's drawn people. It's gaining momentum as it goes, at least it seems to be. And that means that there was a pretty strong undercurrent of dissatisfaction, that people are relating to those we don't once. So I think that's just, that's just the natural way that democracy ought to work. Yes, voting at the booth is good, but sometimes that doesn't work. See, I'm 66 years old. I'm a child of the 60s. We went through something similar back at the Vietnam War. That was the same way. It just started out small as a couple of kids raising hell at a college or two, and then pretty soon it was all over the country. And it just seemed right at the time, and it grew because there was a lot of feeling about not being bullied into wars. So yeah, it's good. It's the way it ought to work. That's how you get your voices known. And sometimes you have to go occupy or go, do that sort of thing in order to get the attention so that the other people who are like-minded can join you. So yeah, I think it's that's the way it ought to work. Yeah.
Do you see any value in using entheogens? I don't know if you've had any experience or an opinion about it, or if you feel comfortable sharing your experience. I've never used them except for pot, but I've had an interest because there's a lot of people that express value in it. Everybody from Andrew Weil to Ram Dass and different mystics talk about the value of mushrooms, at least in pointing the door toward a deeper reality, if not permanently raising your stage of consciousness, but giving you a state that at least points the door to reality, to a deeper reality that might make it easier for you to obtain in a kind of a sober consciousness.
Okay. There's kind of a whole bunch of questions there in a wad. I'll try to answer most of them. In general, drugs are not a good way to go, and generally will create more trouble than they help. Okay, now that's just a general statement. That doesn't mean that they, can't do any good. The one area where I have seen I've talked to some people who convinced me that they get something useful out of it, and they were the people who had no idea about the larger reality. They weren't really too focused on it. They had a drug experience that opened them up to a larger reality. It was one of those peak experiences that you never forget kind of thing. And from then on, they didn't do any more drugs, but they did do some searching. They became a searcher after that, looking for, meaning in life, and what was this all about, and is there a larger reality, and how do I find out, and so on. So it started them on a path of searching for answers. So that, I say, would be a good result. But if the drug experience is your access to the larger reality, that's not good. It doesn't work out too well. Several reasons. The whole point, again, the point isn't getting into altered states of consciousness and into an out-of-body state and getting blasted into the larger reality. That's not the main point to begin with. The main point is love, getting rid of ego, fear. So drug isn't going to do you much good when it comes to the main point. So when it comes to the other things, exploring the larger reality, the problem with the drug is you're not going under your own power. It's like, how do you become an effective explorer of anything when you get blasted there and then fall out, fall back? That's not the way to explore. The way to explore has to be to effective. Now, if all you're looking for is a thrill, then drugs are fine, but thrill isn't going to get you very far in life. That's kind of an empty experience, if you will. Yes, it will give you experience, and yes, it can give you experience of the larger reality. It's not that the drug, can't give you an experience of the larger reality. It can. It's just that it's just an experience. You need to get something out of that experience. You need to walk away from that experience with something more than you had before. That doesn't happen very often with drugs. If you want to learn something valuable from your exploring the larger reality, You need to have your wits about you. You need to be able to think, to be rational. It's not just, oh, wow, gee, you know, this is cool. Look at the colors and the shapes and the big guy with the, you know, white, you know, whatever, and I feel so good. You know, you can do all that, and it's experience. But after it's over, all you've learned is that it was a great, you know, it was a cool experience, and you're not left with anything really tangible. Whereas if you have your mind such that you can experience that, you can interact, you don't just kind of sit around and go, oh, wow. You're actually interacting. You're interacting because you have all your faculties, you know, you have all your abilities with you, and it's just a lot more meaningful. Now, what about when the you know, shaman in traditions where drugs are part of their rituals? That's a little different in the sense that it's still very limiting. Let me back up. It's still very limiting. They can, maybe I can put it this way, if using drugs, like in a shamanistic practice where you become the wolf and run through the woods or whatever it is you do in those practices, if that can get you kind of this far as where you can explore and what you can go, without the drugs, it can get you much further. It's a limited thing. Yes, if you don't have the mental discipline, if you can't get there any other way, it will push you up to that state, and then you can have your experience there. You can do what shamans do at that point. But that's about it. It's not teaching you really about the larger reality, how to deal with it, how to learn from it. You're not going to get around. You're not going to other reality systems. You're doing this one thing that's kind of within their culture, which is maybe prognosticating the future or finding out, you know, where the evil spirits are or something. You're doing this thing. And that, not that that thing isn't necessarily valuable to them, but that's a very limited way to experience and explore the larger reality. It doesn't get you very far. It's not, you know, and other tools are similar. I learned quite by accident that HemiSync, which is a tool that I helped invent, has its limitations in the same reason. It will very quickly pull you right up to this altered state. Nice theta state, good place, you know, good meditation state, and it locks you in there. Well, maybe you're thinking, why would you ever want to go anywhere else? But that's not the case. There's lots of other places to go. You don't want to be locked into that state. You want to be able to control that state with fine tuning so you can go wherever you want. And I found that out by accident when I was at the Monroe Institute, and I was coming back as a board member, and Skip, who was in charge of technology at that time, said, oh, Tom, we got this great new sound. You know, we've really improved it. Everybody loves it. It's terrific. And he said, you know, you need to hear this. I'd like to put you in the booth because, you know, I'm an old guy. I was part of their origins there, and he wanted my opinion of how well this worked. So I got in his booth, and he gave me the sound. And as usual, you know, within a second or two, you know, there I was. And I said, well, it's pretty nice, Skip. You know, it feels good. Got me there, you know, locked in. And he said, okay, and thanks a lot, but I have this personal problem I'd like you to help me with. And he told me about his personal problem. And I said, okay, I'll go handle it for you. And I started to go off to handle it, and it's like a big rubber band pulled me right back to that state. And I go, pull me right back to that state. And I said, Skip, turn that thing off and just give me some pink noise. And he did, and I was gone and handled his personal problem for him. But I didn't realize it until that point that it takes you there without you really having to have the skill to get there on your own, but it locks you in there and it limits what you can do. Drugs are going to be the same way, if not worse. They take you there, but when they take you there, you're spaced out. You're not really yourself. You're not as cogent. You're not as observant. You're not as getting information. You're just having an experience. Well, having an experience, you know, go to the carnival, you know, go to Six Flags or something, have an experience. It's you know, that's the way it is with the drugs. It's an experience, and it may be a wow experience. It may be a peak experience, but by the time it's done, it's just an experience because you're not in a mode to really make a whole lot of it. And it's really a secondary issue anyway. Love and growing up is the primary thing. So you get focused on that. Now, other people I've known who've used drugs more often, not just one time to say, oh, wow, I got to go study this, but they use them, and then they use them because they like that state because it feels good and it's a trip and it's exciting and that sort of thing. Typically, I have found that it puts them in a hole. They've got a longer way to go to be able to do this on their own. I'm not sure why that is, whether the chemicals do something with the brain, but I noticed that meditation then for them is harder. And maybe it's because if you've done something the easy way enough, doing it the hard way is harder. Whereas if you don't know you're doing it the hard way, you just keep slugging on and keep doing it. But if you say, oh man, you know, I could get to this state just like that with the drug, and now here I've been working on this for 4 or 5 months and it's, you know, I'm not doing nearly as well, they tend to give up and not be as robust in their effort to get it. So that's why I say drugs are generally a poor way to go. If you use them often, it tends to put you in a hole, makes it harder. If you use them once, get excited, and then go study, fine. But in general, you're just not as able to learn if you're there on a drug trip. You don't have the control. It's not you doing it. It's something that's being done to you. And there's a real big difference in that. You know, so if you want to explore, and when I talk about exploring, some of it is just looking around and seeing what's there. You get over that in a while. You know, after you've done that 200 or 300 times, it gets boring. By exploring, I tend to mean do experiments, learn things, find out stuff that's important to you, that's, you know, valuable to your growth. Find out how things work, not just a tourist. If you're just a tourist looking at the pretty sights, then again, it turns out just to be an experience. It's not a lot of value. You spend your time better if you were trying to figure out what your fears were and get rid of them. So does that answer your question? Sort of, yeah, it can be okay in special circumstances. Where it's done by a primitive, well, I shouldn't say primitive, some of them may be more evolved than we are, but you know what I mean, a native culture, what do we say? But where it's done by people who that's part of their tradition, where they're taking a drug as part of their traditional, religious, whatever, I think that's just it. It's a tradition. That's what they do. I don't think taking a drug is going to actually evolve the quality of your consciousness in any way. You have to earn that. You can't get that from a drug. It can just give you an experience. And for whatever that experience is worth, that's about all you're going to get out of it. To lower your entropy, or to grow toward love, takes a change from the inside. And a drug isn't going to gift you any of that. So the idea that I'll take drugs and be more spiritual, you'll take drugs and you'll probably be less spiritual. It'll make it harder for you. It'll confuse your mind more than it'll help you do anything. So drugs are generally a bad idea. When I started with Monroe, you know, I never was a drug user, even though I was a child of the 60s, because I was a young physicist and in graduate school, and my mind was my meal ticket. You know, that was it. That's how I was going to survive and get through life and, you know, be able to pay the bills and that sort of thing. Because you can't do that unless you're pretty, you know, you have to be sharp and focused mentally. You can't be fuzzy and do that profession. So I wasn't going to mess with that. So that was kind of my idea. But I would still, you know, have a beer every once in a while with, you know, with the guys and we'd get together. Of course, we do that. But once I started with Monroe, I cut everything out because I didn't want to have confusion between what was I getting and did it have any relationship to any psychotropic drug that I was taking. I wanted it to be, you know, it's just another variable in the mix. So if you do good science, you control all the variables you can. That was one variable I controlled, so I became a teetotaler and cut it all out while I was at Monroe because I did not want to mix things. I wanted to eliminate that variable. And you know, there are a lot of psychotropic substances that aren't called drugs, even though they are in the sense of that word as a substance that gives you affects your mind. And, you know, there are things, you know, besides tobacco and alcohol that are legal and all the stuff, you know, that is illegal. There's things like, you know, sugar and caffeine, and a lot of those things are psychotropic. And I don't suggest that you use any of those either. They will cloud your mind. You won't be as sharp. When you do this when you're able to change your mental state, switch to a different data stream, and you can just do it easily, you have to be very clear-headed. That's not something you can do if you're fuzzy. And psychotropic drugs makes that intent fuzzy. And a fuzzy intent is like trying to do fine surgery, with work gloves on or something. You just don't have that feel. It's really hard to function with a fuzzy head. So I'd say avoid the drugs as much as possible if you're really interested in a spiritual path. They're not going to help you. They're going to probably do you more harm than good. Okay.
Yes, sir. Would you speak a little bit about remote viewing for emotional issues like PTSD and emotional traumas?
In what way? How do you have it applied?
That's what I'm asking you. How would you apply it?
How would you apply it? I don't know that I would limit it just to remote viewing, but you can do an awful lot of good just by working inside your head rather than, having somebody work outside trying to put, like a therapist is trying to help you, but they're working from the outside. You can learn a lot. If, let's say, you have a problem because of PTSD, of an experience you had that's now haunting you, what you may need to do is deal with that experience rather than hide from it. The haunting is because you're trying to get away from it. It's your experience, but you're denying it and you want to escape it. Well, if you really want to get over that, again, the only antidote for fear is courage. You may need to go back, revisit that experience, deal with it, accept it, and go on. And you may be able to do that internally through imagery, through imagination, more easily than you can, talking about it or even sharing it with somebody else. So I would think you could use, that kind of a thing. I'm not sure about remote viewing in particular, but visiting that mental state. Go into that place where your fear is. Go into that place, like a long time ago they had a thing called primal scream, where you'd get in a box and then you just let it all loose, and you do whatever you felt like and get it out of your system. Basically what that was a dredging up to where you deal with things rather than keep stuff, buried. Because when it's buried, it festers, and as it festers, it drives you nuts. So any way that you could get them to pull it up, using probably guided visuals, take them back to the place where their experiences were, get them to face it, get them to see the bigger picture. However, I don't know, I guess it would depend on the individual, but that can be very powerful. Not only that, another aspect of that, if you have someone that you're trying to help who has that issue, you can do a lot of good for them by, if you get in that altered state, you can then go to them and talk to them in that altered state. You can get information to them in a way that is deep and powerful if what you have is their best interest at heart. You can't go in and manipulate, well, you can, but you shouldn't go in and manipulate somebody like that. But you can get and talk to them, reassure, try to explain the context of what's troubling them so that they, instead of seeing in the little picture of how awful it was, they see it in the bigger picture that they were just part of another big drama, and it just, it's not that they're awful people or something. They just got caught up in this big drama and they just need to realize that's what it was horrible, and then let go of it. You can encourage them to be able to do that. You can give them some of the courage they need by kind of talking to them non-physically. They hear you at a deep level. To them, it sounds like the voice in their ear. So it will give them, as long as you're giving them the love and the encouragement to be, then they'll take that in. If you try to do something else, they can shut you out. They kind of know intuitively whether you're a friend or a foe. And if you're a friend, they'll listen. And they'll listen more to that than if you try to verbally talk to them, because then you're somebody lecturing them, trying to tell them what to do, trying to change them, and they immediately will be resistant. Whereas if you're a voice in their head, it's really them talking to themselves. Does that help?
Just a quick comment. Love is the answer. Now, what was the question? You probably heard that before.
Yeah.
I am interested in the concept of the subsets as far as levels are concerned. And I'm coming from a viewpoint of like some of Ken Wilber's work. I don't know if you're familiar with Ken Wilber or not, but he talks about hold-ons. So like the Russian doll type of thing. Something's contained within and out. I'm interested in that, I guess I would say that 1% that is impacted here in this particular subset by the next subset above it. Am I on the right track by understanding it? Can you give me
there are.
a little clarity about that, how that happens?
Basically, you know, we talked a little bit about synchronicity. That would be that interaction coming down here. And so if we just look at the biggest footprint or the biggest touch that comes from the non-physical into the physical, I would say synchronicity is probably one of the biggest touches that we have. And that's basically the larger consciousness system helping individuals succeed in their drive to lower their entropy, to grow up, you know, increase the quality of consciousness, spiritual growth, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. That happens a lot. And the more you listen to it and the more you get out of it, the more it happens to you. And you can find some right-brained people that just live their whole life in synchronicity. Everything they do is that way. They've given up trying to control anything, and when they need it, it'll come. If it doesn't come, they don't need it. You know, that sort of thing. And they can live very, very well with, you know, what I mean by that is very happy, very satisfied, and very content. That kind of a connection. So synchronicity is just a major part of their life. And there's other people, of course, who don't believe it ever happened to anybody, and it certainly never happened to them. And that's because it would be no value to them, so it doesn't happen. So that's a big one. But there's other thing, that touch that comes down here. You get it in the form of precognitive dreams. You get it in the form of all sorts of things, deja vu. And what these are is the larger conscious system trying to get your attention, trying to wake you up and say, you know, look, reality's bigger than you think. Yeah. One of the examples I liked the best was an engineering friend of mine. He's a Canadian, and when I was writing my book, he was real interested in free will. He had this thing about free will. And it was because of him, I have that long section on free will. I kept trying to answer his need there. But he had the experience. He was an engineer. Like most engineers, you know, it was physical's all there is. And, you know, he wasn't interested in any of this crazy stuff that these mush-headed people believed, you know, and so on. Until one night he had a very clear dream in which he was flying and he was up in the sky and found an airplane. Went inside the airplane. Because he was an engineer, he knew this airplane, you know, the make, model, type. He knew about airplanes. And he looked in there at all the passengers, and he saw them, he said, in as much detail as if he were just standing there. He saw the color of their clothes, you know, what they were wearing, what they looked like, everything about them. And the most odd thing was that they were all in black and white except one little girl who was in color. 2 days later, an airplane of exactly that make and model crashed. One little girl survived. And he, of course, read all that he could about it, and he found out that everything he could find out about it was a perfect match to what he had seen. Well, that changed his whole life. He was a different person after that because he couldn't deny it. It happened to him, and that started him then, you know, to become a seeker. He was interested in these things. He started reading, you know, on the internet. So those kinds of things we get, but a lot of people have those kinds of experiences, and they're just wake-up calls. You know, it wasn't that he really needed to know about that plane or that crash or those people. It was just a little cold water in the face. You know, look here, Lyle, reality's bigger than you thought it was. Otherwise, how could this happen? He could no longer say, oh, bullshit, this fuzzy-headed people, because now he was one of them, you see. So that, I think, is the main reason we get touched. But other than that, there are other things. On a smaller scale, you can have individuals at a non-physical level interacting with individuals here. But that's small compared to what I just described. In that case, it could be any number of things. Could be you're getting some special help. It could be, you know, we talk about guides and things like that, right? And that would be influence. Well, all a guide is, you know, we call the guide, and it's a being. It's just a metaphor for our interface to the larger conscious system. It's really just the larger conscious system. So are we just the larger consciousness system? See, it's all of that. Occasionally, you'll get some of the Negative types will try to influence people. It does, you know, our morality here kind of in all our movies and everything boil down to good versus evil. Well, there's a reason for that. That really is the theme of the larger reality system as well as this virtual reality system. So you have some negative things, and occasionally they will try to encourage de-evolution that would interfere. I shouldn't say really interfere, encourage, you know, others to do the wrong thing. There are those that might encourage you to do the right thing. So occasionally you have some of that, but this is more of a minor influence. It's not like everybody has this going on. You know, there's nobody messing with most people. It's just certain people in certain circumstances. Interesting enough, as people gain power and leverage to make things happen, then they become more and more attractive to those who would want to manipulate their attitudes and thoughts. So that's, I've noticed that it tends to work that way. And sometimes it's just like, you know, you might walk in the park and somebody might step out and try to take your wallet from you. It can be like that too. Sometimes it's just wrong place at the wrong time, and you just happen to interact with some non-physical entity for some reason that really doesn't have anything to do with you because you just happened to be there while he was looking for trouble. That's very rare. You know, I wouldn't advise anybody to worry about it. It's not, you know, it's nothing worth worrying about. Probably less probable than being mugged in the park. But things can happen. Almost anything can happen. And most of the time it does, but fortunately in very small numbers. Okay.
You being in academia and writing a book in a major field like physics that the powers that be, you know, I know want to influence. Have you run into that kind of adversity in your field?
One, I'm not an academic physicist, so I don't work in university. I've always worked out in industry. And the good news in industry is that if you help them increase their bottom line, they like you. They promote you, you know, they give you more and more to do. And if you let them, you know, they'll work you, you know, 24 hours a day. So it's a much more, how do you contribute to the bottom line in industry than it is in academia. And academia is a very political place, very, very political. And it's not only how often do you publish and the quality of that publication, but it's a lot of who you're friends with, and it's a lot of strutting, a lot of ego. You know, academia is a pretty tough place to be, I think, for those reasons. But no, I've never run into a lot of difficulty that way. I ran into difficulty with publishers, talking about big corporations. When I first wanted to get this published, everybody wanted to cut it down. You know, they wanted to throw out, you know, 75% of it. What do you want to be? Science or touchy-feely? You know, take your pick. Don't try to do both. They don't mix. That kind of thing. They found, well, first of all, of course, they didn't read. So I did find a lot of resistance to my ideas there, but fortunately I lived in a time when it really didn't matter a whole lot because we have an internet, and you're not necessarily beholden these days to big corporations to get your, you know, make your voice available. And once it's available, it's a matter of viral. You know, if people like it, they'll tell other people. If they don't, you know, then nothing happens. So I haven't really been bothered much by that. In my professional work, I generally keep a fairly low profile. You know, I don't talk a whole lot about these subjects unless somebody asks. If they ask, I talk to them about it, but I don't, you know, walk around with a copy of my book, you know, and say, you know, look what I've written. You know, I'm Mr. Out of Body, and isn't that cool? You know, you don't do any of that kind of stuff because you're not interested in that. You know, that doesn't make any difference. The people at work aren't interested in that either, so you don't push where nobody wants. So that's, you know, so I haven't had any trouble with it at work. Matter of fact, what happens now is that I'm known well enough that the older people, of course, never heard of me, but the kids, you know, to me, I'm 66. Anybody under, you know, 40 is a kid. The kids come around, the ones just getting out of school or whatever. I've seen all your vids on, you know, on YouTube, and these guys have been playing virtual reality games, you know, since they were 5. and they really like it. They relate to it. So I find a lot of young people end up wherever as I am. The young people end up gathering around me. They want to talk about it. They're open. The older people, they've already been there, done that. They're not interested in anything new for the most part. So no, I've not had a lot of problems that way. Now, as far as the physics community goes, if you interviewed 100 physicists at random, you'd probably find 98 of them would say bullshit. There's nothing around, but it's all physical. Anybody that says anything different, they're not real open most of the time. But that's just if you looked at 100. You got probably 100,000 physicists, and if you get 2 or 3% of them are open-minded, that's enough to cause a revolution. You don't need any more than that. So I find plenty of those too. I had a lot of physicists and other scientists and engineer types and computers. Probably some of you are like that. Come to these talks, and mostly they're really very excited about it, and they think they're really great ideas. I explain to them, why speed of light's constant and that kind of stuff. They really like it because nobody knows. I'm telling them an answer that they don't have. So in general, I find a lot of good feelings from that minority. From the bigger majority, no, I sometimes get letters from physicists that say, well, your thing on the double slit's all wrong. It doesn't work that way, because of da-da-da-da-da. And of course, they're just mouthing the line, the party line that says all this is impossible anyway. It can't be done. So obviously you're not doing it because it's impossible and it can't be done. And it's that sort of thing. So they're just not open-minded. They're skeptical. I said skeptical. And if you're skeptical and not open-minded, then you're closed, right? You never learn anything new. If you're open-minded and not skeptical, now you're naive. You're gullible. You can be taken advantage of. So you really need to have both of those things together. You need to be able to work both of those. I've had a lot of interesting interactions with people who are, quote, their own title, religious. I've had any number of people who've come up to me and said, I'm really religious. I'm a very religious person. And I kind of expect then that they're going to be unhappy with me because I don't exactly, support dogma or that sort of thing. And I say belief is the enemy. But it hasn't been that way. Most of the people that have told me that they're very religious come up and say, this is great. I love it. And I say, well, what do you like about it? And they say, you've derived God. And I say, well, what do you mean I've derived God? And they said, larger conscious system, that's God. And I said, yeah, but there's no dogma, there's nothing to believe, there's no creed. And they said, well, that stuff doesn't matter anyway. See, these are people who've already outgrown that phase of their religion. They're not interested in creed and dogma and stuff. They're interested in spiritual growth. Well, that's probably a minority of people who would call themselves religious. But they find that it puts their belief, if you will, it puts their idea of God and their idea of spirituality now in a scientific context that, in their mind, gives it credibility. So they're very pleased with it. So I've had some very nice, very positive interactions with people who self-define themselves as very religious. But I think they're probably a little more open-minded than the average person who would describe themselves that way. But I've felt real good about that. It's very encouraging. Yeah, I had one lady says that she keeps 2 books on her nightstand all the time, the Bible and My Big Toe. So I said, that's great,
I'm a religious person.
Have you ever written out a formula like E equals MC squared regarding your big toe?
No, I haven't. And, I think that will probably come. Oh, yeah. Pamela says there is an R equals I, and that's reality equals information. But I don't really call that an equation. That's an identity. And anyway, I think maybe some of that will come. I believe there's some real science, engineering, psychology, mathematics. In the books I introduce a whole new concept in mathematics called process fractals. I think this stuff will become explored, but I don't think it's quite ready for that yet. I think first you have to get the basic idea down, if you can get the basic idea to where people want to say, well, let's see where this logic takes us, and they start developing those ideas into various fields, then I think we can see a lot of that sort of stuff. It'll probably turn into equations in places. I don't think it's time yet, and I haven't done it, partly because I'm interested in it at a higher level. I'm not really interested in working and fleshing out the logical ramifications, just enough to kind of see what's interesting out there, but I want to leave that for others. I don't want to do that so much as I want to try to work at it from the bigger view. That's mathematics is the logic of quantity. Math is just logic. You can reduce all of mathematics just to logical statements, and do all your math as an if-then statements in computers, because it's just logic of quantity. Well, what we're talking about now is in quantity. What we're talking about now is big concepts. We haven't got down to where quantity really matters yet. So no, R equals I is all I've got.
What would be your E side of the equation? Just that one piece, because it'll be this equals blah, 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 blah. What would be
Well, you see, this it wouldn't be an E, it would be an I. See, that would be the thing. It would be I. See, E is energy. Energy, matter, is all part of the physical, the physical stuff. And reality isn't really that physical stuff. Reality is really information. So basically, where the equations are going to come is going to be in information theory. And there's lots of people working in that area. But once they kind of see this bigger connection, I think you're going to see a lot more math come out of information theory when they realize that everything here is just information, that's what we are, that's what this reality is.
I have a question about free will and healing.
Okay.
When you're dealing with healing and you're wanting to heal someone else, whether it be remotely or they're here with you, does the recipient need to believe or at least accept that he can be healed?
Okay, it's a good...
And I'm thinking about that in free will, because if he does not choose or she does not choose to believe that they would receive that healing, no matter what our intent is, how does that work?
Okay, good question. That's a question I normally talk about when I have more time. So it's a very good question. You should always be careful that you don't run roughshod over somebody else's free will. You don't want to say, you don't want to play God and say, I know how things should be, and you should be healed, and you should be sick, and you should give me a promotion, and then use your mind to try to make all those things happen. That's the wrong approach. Now it's just more control, power, and force, except you're using your mind to change the probabilities to suit your ego. That's not good, so you should avoid that kind of thing. When you're healing somebody, there's really two different groups of healers that I'll break us into. One of them is the beginners, the ones that are just learning, and I think there's little harm they can do, because in the beginning they're not going to come with that much power that they're really going to overwhelm anyone. What happens if you try to heal someone that really doesn't want the healing? They may need that illness. Illness is part of what we are and what we do. Illness can be important to us. It can be a great teacher as well. You have to get over the idea that living as long as you can is the point of life. It's not. It's growing up. It's learning. And sometimes illness can be a learning process. Even if it terminates you in this life, it's not a big deal. You go get another one. So you can't think about dying as the big problem. It's not. Learning is the big problem. So illness can be an effective tool for learning, not only for the ill person, but for all the people around them as well. So you don't want to go in and start jerking around somebody else's, game, somebody else's path that they're on. So you need to be careful and very respectful. If you're a beginner, and you're not quite sure how, when you should try and when you shouldn't, and you always can't go ask somebody for their permission. You know, you just hear about somebody had a child and they were doing this, so you just say, well, I'll just help out. That's okay. I'd say just do that, because you're not going to overwhelm somebody. What will happen when you try to heal somebody and they don't really want to be healed? Not necessarily intellectually, but at a deeper level, it just won't work. You'll go to heal them, and whatever you did to heal them in minutes after you're done is back. And if you are strong enough that you can overwhelm them, which is possible, and you can force them to be healed, what will happen is they'll get sick again in some other way. They'll go right back into that situation. Oh, I just limited your stomach cancer. Oh, you got run over by a truck the next day, huh? Oh, you know, too bad. You know, things, they work out. So it's really hard to run over somebody's free will, particularly if you're in the beginning to mid-level. Now you can, it is a matter of how much energy you bring to it. If you're a very powerful healer, then you can overpower somebody else's free will. But if you're a very powerful healer, you've probably grown up enough that you don't, that you wouldn't do that. So for those of you who are beginning or want to do these exercises, I'd say don't worry too much about it. You're not going to hurt anyone. It'll just bounce off if it isn't wanted, okay? But it's still nice to ask people if they want. But, you know, some people will say, you're going to what? You're a psychic healer? Oh, come on, I thought you had a brain. You know, I didn't know you were one of those mush heads. So you may not want to talk about it. That's okay. You can still do it. So permission depends. The stronger you get, the least likely you are to even heal anybody, because you kind of learn that things are the way they are because that's the way they're supposed to be, and you leave them alone. You don't, you know, the people who have the most power probably use it the least. Now, about your idea about, well, if they don't believe it, will it not work? Now, it has nothing to do with it. Whatever they believe is irrelevant. What you're doing is modifying the probability of a future outcome, period. Whether they believe it or don't believe it isn't an issue. Now, if they don't want it, that is the issue. They push back and it doesn't work. But if it's just a matter of, you know, they think you're nuts, it won't make any difference whatsoever. You'll be just as effective no matter what they think.
So you had talked about, you know, this being a virtual reality and, you know, the theory, the Big Bang theory. Mm-hmm. But, you know, cause can't cause itself.
Right.
Any insight or thoughts, or maybe there's something in your book that talks about kind of, you know, what alternate reality or what other kind of, you know, reality created this universe?
Well, yeah, the other reality that created this universe is consciousness. Consciousness created this universe because it needed a place for us to interact with each other, where we could get feedback and grow up. So it's the idea of consciousness creating a learning lab so that we can be here and experience and grow up. So that's the, and if you think about that, it is an intelligent, you can call this is an intelligent being. It's the consciousness system. It's a self-changing, self-modifying consciousness system, and it's aware. So it's not like the system is, doesn't know what it's doing. It does know what it's doing, but it's not, it's evolving. So, but it's evolving intelligently because it's an intelligent system. So yes, it evolved this reality frame for us to interact in because that was helpful for its own evolution. So that's what's outside. That's where the run button was pushed. I just call it the larger conscious system. Now there's a lot of other reality frames out there. We are not the only, kindergarten for consciousness to come and learn. There are other kindergartens out there. There's some that are even maybe high schools, and there's some that are even less than daycare. There's some of them that aren't nearly as generally evolved as we are. Some very mean places. There are other ones. We're not the only ones. So when it created this virtual reality, why not create another one? Why not create another one until you have as many as you need? Nobody needs to stand in line, right? This is a computer. Once you've done one, it's easy to do the next one. You can maybe tweak a few variables and run it again. Although most of them aren't that different in a fundamental way from here. In details, they're very different. But I think that's because there's only a few stable solutions to evolving something like this. I think you can't have something too much different. It doesn't end up with a stable simulation. I don't know if you do much in simulations, but if you do a lot of simulations, some of them aren't stable. You know, the results vary all over the place. They don't get to a steady state. They never converge to anything. Well, this obviously converged to this universe. This particular simulation now has evolved this universe and all the things in it, including us. So that's real stable. Now, it may disappear yet, you know. I mean, it may not be stable forever, but at least it's stable in this amount of time. But I think if you change those constants and those inputs too much, you don't get a stable system out of it. So that's why a lot of them are very similar to what we have here. But yes, there are dozens of other, what I call tightly constrained reality systems, very much like ours. Other schoolhouses. We're not the only schoolhouse, you know, in the neighborhood. There's others. And then there's other virtual realities, like when we die. You know, we go to virtual reality for a while until we come back. And then there's the dream reality. That's another virtual reality. So there's lots of virtual realities out there. Each one has its own use, its own function. But most of them are all there for interaction so that consciousness can interact and learn from it. Okay, we had
A few questions back, you spoke about the fact that when people begin to grow up more and begin to become love more than they were, that they are attractive to sometimes darker forces. And I wonder if you'd speak more to that issue in terms of protection without fear, and what if you don't particularly like being the object of that kind of attraction?
Well, for the most part, fear is the problem. If you are fearless, you're very likely to have much trouble with anything that is negative bothering you. Your fear is a handle by which you can be manipulated. And that's not only true of, you know, in the non-physical, that's true of everywhere. I mean, how do the marketers manipulate us? Oh, buy this beer or the girls won't like you. You know, it's fear. It's all about fear. Use this makeup, you know, or the men won't like you. So they play on our fears all the time. And politicians play on our fears all the time. So anybody that wants to manipulate people, find out what they're afraid of, and you can manipulate them. So fear is it's like if you have fear, that energy, that negative energy, can find that fear and resonate and use it and build it and make it bigger. So it can fan those flames, if you will. So that's your connection. If you are fearless, it's very, very difficult for anything or anybody to interact with your energy that you don't want, because you don't give them a handle by which they can manipulate you. So the main thing is don't have any fear. If something's giving you a hard time and you want it to stop, you need to just let go of it. In other words, face it. When that happens, tell them to go away and, you know, don't have any fear about it. That's just the way it is. And also what's the worst that can happen? What's the worst thing they can do to me? How bad could it get? Drive me insane, make me crazy, kill me, whatever? Okay, I accept that. That's the way it's going to be. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get in their face and tell them to leave me alone. And they can do whatever they want about it. And you'll find out that if you have that attitude and you're fearless, they'll leave. They don't have any way to control, manipulate, or put energy into you because you just don't accept it. So the answer there is get rid of the fear. That's the hook that they can play on. Fear, of course, you have fear, and then fear from that derives ego. Ego is a result of fear. You know, from that drives expectations, wants, needs, desires, all those other things. So if you can get rid of the fear, you get rid of that whole bunch. And it makes you pretty much invulnerable. I mean, not entirely. Again, almost anything can happen, but it makes you pretty much invulnerable to anybody having any putting any negative energy in you. They may try, but if there's no fear, there's nothing for that negative energy to get a hold of. It's like it bounces off. It doesn't stick. There's nothing for it to resonate with. There's nothing for it to connect to, because there's no fear.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. And thank you guys for coming.
I was watching The 13th Floor last night. That's a movie that Tom, that you mentioned in a recent interview. That was a good one. And so today in the talk, you mentioned the Big Bang as being evidence for the fact that we're living in a virtual reality system. I guess the idea being that somebody had to push the start button. There's nothing that we can say before the advent of the Big Bang. And so that is the idea, that's evidence in the dimension of time, I guess. So I was wondering if you have any similar ideas or about something like that in the dimension of space. In other words, well, sort of like what was in the 13th floor, you know, the movie. That's the question. Thank you.
Well, hello, Bob. Thanks for asking the question, and here's the answer. You asked if I had any criteria for determining whether or not this is a virtual reality that was space-like rather than the one that I gave you, which is time-like. The time-like one being that when you get to the beginning of your reality, you'll find a discontinuity. There is no beginning, because the beginning occurred in a non-physical reality. At least it appears to be non-physical to you. It occurred in some different reality. Therefore, not in yours. Yours just seemed to start out of nothing. That's one thing, and that's what you're calling a kind of a time-wise discontinuity. And you're asking, is there a spatial one? Well, the spatial one I think I mentioned, but I didn't really make too much of it, and that is that in our reality, we have a universe that is continually expanding. Matter of fact, the expansion is accelerating. Okay, now that creates a problem for an objective reality. Doesn't create a problem for a virtual reality. In an objective reality, you can't just expand. You have to expand into something, into space that exists. You know, if you expand the balloon, it has to expand into a volume that isn't occupied. So that creates a question of what is this volume that isn't occupied that our universe is expanding into? And it's obviously not part of our universe because we haven't expanded into it yet. So it's not physical. What is it? And where does all the extra volume that we get, you know, how's that created? Now we have a lot more cells or volume in our own space. So this issue, how can we expand into something, into what? What is it that's out there we're expanding into? Well, that's just a bad question based on a misunderstanding that reality is indeed objective. So let's look at the computer now. Let's look at the digital world. In the digital world, let's say I have a little laptop, and on this little laptop I'm going to put in a very, very simple program. This program will be a little do loop, and what I'll do is calculate the, say, the diameter of a sphere. And I'm going to start with a sphere that's, say, let's just say something, 100 miles. And then I'm going to go through the time loop once, and when I go through the time loop, the next time I'm going to change that to 100 miles squared. And then I'm going to go through the loop again, and I'm going to change that to 100 miles cubed. I'm going to go through the time loop, so you get it every time the exponent goes to n equals n plus 1. It goes up one more. Well, eventually, after just, 50 or 60 iterations, I'm going to be up to an exponent of 100 miles to the 50 or 60 power. Now, I am approaching the dimensions of the universe, you see. I'm exceeding the dimensions of the universe. So we can very easily let this program run, and we can go up to exponents of millions and billions and just run on. We can go billions of times larger than the diameter of our universe. So it's very easy in this tiny little laptop to simulate a sphere that is trillions of times bigger than our entire universe. And nobody says, my God, how can you make a sphere that big in that tiny little computer? Because that's silly. It's just numbers. It's just exponents. It's just data. Well, we have an expanding universe. My God, what does it expand into? It's not expanding into anything. It's just data. You see? When will it stop? When is it going to run out? It's just data. It's got a rule set. Gravity, other things, will come into play. When the matter reaches the speed of light, that'll come into play. It suddenly becomes infinitely heavy. That'll slow it down a whole lot, won't it? So you have other things that are going to come into play that are going to affect that. But for now, we're not approaching light speed with the universe, and well, we are approaching it, but we're not there to the end yet. But in any case, it's just data in a computer. So it's not expanding into anything. That sphere in our little laptop, we didn't ask, what is that expanding into? Right? The question doesn't make any sense. It's not expanding into anything. We're just increasing an exponent by 1, and it just gets a bigger number. Well, that's the way it is with our expanding universe. So that's another attribute of a virtual reality, is that it can expand, it can accelerate its expansion, and it doesn't need to expand into anything. It's just a bigger number. There's nothing out there that we have to expand into. That's a concept of a virtual reality. So that is another area where virtual reality makes sense, and the objective reality doesn't make sense. So that's a spatial version, if you will.
Questions about energy. What is it really? Beyond the MC squared formula that we're playing with, is there something more to energy than what we really know? Something very, very basic. Is it part of the AUO, the absolute unbounded oneness? Is it part of that?
What is energy within consciousness? We know we have E equals mc squared, and that's here in this virtual reality. Here, energy is something that causes something else to change. That's how we define energy. Energy is the ability to have an effect. So if you can do something, change something, move something, modify its quality, its color, its size, its position, anything. If you can make something change, its temperature, anything, then that requires energy to make something else change. So energy is the metaphor for energy is the ability to change something. Now, in consciousness, we use the same metaphor. Energy is the ability to change something. But there is no physical energy. There is no heat. There is no, there's no color. There's no more mass, because we're in the non-physical. We're in consciousness. There is no position. So what's energy? Energy is the same thing as before. It's just implemented differently. Energy is the ability to change something. Now, in an information field, you change something by changing the information. An information field of numbers, you can change it by changing a number, adding one to it. All of that would be representative of energy. It's modifying the data. Okay, now let's say when we are in healing, there's little healing experiments we did. When I said take a light beam and dissipate the dark spots, everybody's thinking of that light beam as a form of energy. We're putting energy to that black spot, and we're dissolving it, we're making it go away. Energy is just a metaphor. It's the thing that allows us to change things. What we're really changing there is we're changing the information. We're modifying the probability of that black spot continuing to be black. We're modifying the probability of that black spot, to become healthy, increasing the probability of good health. So what are we doing? We're changing a probability. We're changing something. That's energy. We're able to make a change. Energy in an information system is just a metaphor for an ability to change. You're modifying data, and that represents energy. So we start with the big digital bang. So in the big digital bang, remember, we put a lot of energy together in one little tight ball, and high pressure, high temperature, then we let it expand. It's just a simulation. What was that energy in that tight little ball? It was just input constants. We decided, you know, we can put any input constant we want. However much energy we desired, we could just put that in as an input to the initial conditions of this big digital bang, and then when we push the button, it runs. And if we'd say, oh, this would work better if we had 10 times that amount of energy, then we just multiply that number by 10 and run it again. You see, energy is just a change in the data inside an information system.
I have another question. In his explorations, did he find a spiritual hierarchy out there in places like the Earth life system, like there's entities that fill roles, that control the activities we have here on Earth and in this system?
How non-physical reality is run and managed, I guess. The question was for a hierarchy of control, you might say, consent, control. Is there a hierarchy, and if so, how does it work? Well, yes, there is some hierarchy. There is some management function. Whenever you have a complex system, you have, with rules and with free will, you have to have somebody who helps police the rules, that makes sure things are working the way they're supposed to, that you know, systems are all go, if you will. So there does need to be a function of management. We have a lot of entities in the non-physical. They have rules about how they can interact, what they can do to each other, under what circumstances. It's not just a complete free-for-all that anybody can do anything they can get away with. It's not the law of the jungle out there. There are some rules as to how one can interact. And if there are rules, then you don't need policemen, you know, in cars with flashing lights, but you need something that can enforce rules that are broken, or you also need something that makes up the rules to be imposed. So yes, there is some hierarchy, some management, and generally though, this management is not a forceful management. It makes up rules, it enforces rules, but it does all this in NPMR, in the non-physical. It never, well, let me take this back. The rules are not about how you or any other individual is supposed to act. Well, let me take that back. The rules are limitations, they're constraints. That's what rules are. They're constraints that may constrain how you can act. Not you as a physical being here. You have free will and you can act within the constraints of the rule set here. You're allowed to do whatever you want. And you get, you know, you either evolve or de-evolve based on what it is you do. That's the way the rules work in this virtual reality. But when you get out into the non-physical, there's a few more rules there. There are rules about the way, let's say that non-physical beings have certain rules that limit the way they can interfere with us while we're here in this virtual reality. And those rules are kind of obvious. If you had a school, if you were the principal at a school, and kids from outside the school kept coming in and you know, harassing you know, the school children in your class, that would interfere with their learning. So there's certain rules that say that people are in a virtual reality or in class, and you need to basically leave them alone. Now you can interact with them, but that interaction is not open-ended. There's some rules about the limits of that interaction. You can influence, but you can't push. Maybe you don't understand that, but you know, that doesn't mean the rules are always obeyed. There are rules, but sometimes the rules are violated. Sometimes the violations are caught. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they just kind of pass notice and nobody really notices, and the word never gets back that there was a problem. So it's not a perfect system, but there is a system of rules, and there are administrators, if you will, but very few. It's not like there's a big bureaucracy that does it. There's like the top end administrator, which in my books I with humor called the big cheese, and there's maybe a few others that work there, but in general it's very, very few, because there's not a lot of hands-on. It's mostly a hands-off kind of an operation. Attention is only brought to problems. Everything else just runs on its own. So that's the kind of system it is. I hope that answers your question. Read the books, I guess. Go to Google Books, they're free. Read it there, and you'll read Google, and then I think you can search in Google, search on the big cheese, and it'll tell you a little bit about the administration in NPMR.
Another question is there an end to the all of creation? Is there like a surface to it? Is there a finite size to this? And beyond that, is there other entities or things like this out in infinity?
Okay. Is there an end to creation? Not that we can see, would be the answer to that. The larger consciousness system is finite. Just like our universe is finite. It's expanding, but it just means it's getting bigger. It's finite. Infinite is an impossibility. The concept of the word infinite means bigger than the biggest. Well, whatever number you have, it can always get bigger. You can always add one to it. So you can never get to infinity. Infinity is an impossibility. Infinity only exists as a metaphor. A lot of people, particularly if you're not into math or science, use the word infinity as a metaphor for very, very big. Big beyond comprehension. So big you can't even imagine how big it is, and that's infinity. But now that's kind of a sloppy use of the word in a technical sense. In a technical sense, infinity means larger than can be. So infinity can't be. See what I mean? Infinity is just it's something you can approach but never attain. It's an impossibility. So nothing real can ever be infinite. You're sitting in an inner tube in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 1,000 miles away from the nearest land. You look in every direction, the ocean looks infinite. You say, oh, this ocean's infinite, but we know it isn't. It's just big to a person sitting in an inner tube in the middle of it. It seems infinite. Consciousness system seems infinite to us because it is big beyond our ability to imagine. So we say, yes, we have an infinite consciousness system. Not true, but people say that anyway because they just mean it to be really, really big. But I use the word more precisely because I'm a physicist, and to me, infinite is an impossibility. The consciousness system is finite. Whenever you say it's finite, it has boundaries. It ends somewhere. It can't go on forever. What's outside the boundary? Who knows? That's not something that we can know because we are consciousness, and to know what's outside of consciousness, we have to get outside of consciousness. And if you are consciousness, getting outside of consciousness is impossible. That's like getting outside of your skin to take a look at yourself. You can't do that because you are this body. You can't get outside of it. Wherever you go, it goes with you. Well, we are consciousness, and we can't see what's outside of there, but it doesn't mean there isn't anything out there, and it doesn't mean that what's out there isn't important to us. Or maybe there's nothing out there. The point is, it's beyond our ability to know because we are consciousness, and therefore we can't see outside of that system without getting outside of that system. It's also not perfect. It's finite and imperfect. The consciousness system doesn't always do everything right and precisely. It works on probability, so it does things that it thinks is probably going to work out. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
How is consciousness inserted into virtual reality. Because his consciousness is actually different than the virtual realities that he talks about. Somehow, how is it connected to it?
Okay, how is consciousness inserted into a virtual reality? When you ask that question, it shows that you have this concept that there's this virtual reality, and it's kind of its own separate, unique thing. And then there's this consciousness system out there, and it's its own separate, unique thing. And now consciousness has to be inserted from this consciousness down into this virtual reality. And that's because you have a cultural belief in an objective reality where everything is separate and different and in its own space, and they're two different things. Well, they're not two different things. The virtual reality is a computed simulation, and it's computed by consciousness. So consciousness is the computer, and this virtual reality is just data inside the server, if you will, inside consciousness. Now, consciousness has a piece of itself, again, inside consciousness, and it's going to restrict this piece of itself to abiding by the rule set in this virtual reality. So that's simple. It says, okay, you can experience whatever these virtual characters can experience, and within this multiplayer game, but no more. You're limited by what they can experience according to their rule set. So then the data stream that this consciousness gets is just constrained to have in it only those things that can take place within this virtual reality. So you're limited there. Well, that's how you get into it. So it's not that you launch into it, or somehow you get consciousness gets stuck into somebody's brain through a big hypodermic needle. There's no real insertion going on. You are consciousness, and you restrict yourself. A piece of you is restricted to just get a data stream consistent with the constraints of the virtual reality. Now, how does it happen? Well, in this virtual reality, there are these virtual beings who have come through the simulation. They've evolved in this simulation, and they're like humans, let's say. Well, other animals work the same. And the way they procreate is through sex and having babies. Okay, so now you're going to join this reality. What happens? So we have in this virtual reality, in this simulation, these evolved characters in the simulation get pregnant. So the woman gets pregnant, and that's a fetus. The fetus starts to grow. When that fetus starts to have access to data, in other words, when that fetus starts to be able to experience. So experience is the hallmark of a virtual reality. When it can start experiencing, it knows it's warm, it knows it's wiggling, it can feel the fluid, it can shake its feet, it can hear noises. You see, these are experiences. So when it starts getting data that define experiences, that's when the consciousness can restrict itself to that experience. So by restricting itself to that experience, it's restricting itself to the experience of that entity within the rule set. Now that entity is what? It's just an entity in a simulation. It's a product of a big digital bang that ended up with this universe, with this solar system, with this planet, with this biology growing here. And men, being two kinds, male and female, and sex and babies and fetuses, and that's just how this simulation evolved. So that's the constraint based on consciousness. So when that fetus begins to experience, that's the first opportunity for this consciousness to restrict itself to the experience that would be possible within the rule set of this virtual reality. So that's what the consciousness is doing. It's experiencing what this virtual character can do, you see, in this virtual reality, no more. Okay, now it's still consciousness, so it can still go travel in the world of consciousness. But as far as its immersion in this virtual reality, it's constrained to experience what this virtual baby can do. Now, this virtual baby, according to the rule set, is going to grow up and become a virtual adult, and maybe have virtual babies of its own. And when it does, those virtual babies will, there'll be a consciousness that will be restricted to experience nothing other than what this virtual baby in this simulation might experience. So see, that's how that works. It's not really so much an insertion as it is a virtual reality that's just data, a consciousness that gets information, because that's what consciousness does. It's an information field. It gets information restricted by the constraints of this virtual character in the virtual reality. So that's the method of the insertion. And again, the consciousness is not restrained. It's restrained as far as its actions in the virtual reality goes to the rule set, but it can still go out of body. It can still, do other things in the world of consciousness, because it is still consciousness as well. But in as much as it's acting inside the virtual reality, it's constrained to the virtual reality. That's how that works. Is that it? We're done.